Oscar, I am here with Bassima Alghussein. She is the CEO of Alghussein Global Strategies. She has experience on Capitol Hill and as well was a White House appointee. And Bassima, of course, President Donald Trump is meeting as we speak with the Secretary General of the United Nations. He was actually on Capitol Hill on Thursday making the rounds where he has, of course, supporters and detractors. But what is it that he had to speak to his detractors about to bring them around to his point of view?
One of the biggest criticisms in Congress and in fact throughout the administration is frustration with the United Nations over the perceived large bureaucracy and the not fiscal responsibility when it comes to the management of United States funds. And so Congress, of course, has control over the budget process. And as we know, the Trump administration has requested drastic cuts to the United Nations aid that the United States provides. And so it would be very important for the Secretary General to be on Capitol Hill, making sure that the members of Congress who have jurisdiction over key committees feel that it's an important mission and hopefully plus up the appropriations bills greater than what the president asked for.
So in addition to Guterres, we had the head of NATO here in Washington on Thursday, Jens Stoltenberg. So the two leaders of the most multilateral organizations in the world facing off with the most, I guess, unilateral president.
Right.
What were they up against and what are they up against now that Guterres is in the White House with the president?
So Guterres has three main points of tension with President Trump. The first is when the president pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement when he first came into office. The second was the decision to pull the United States out of the Iran deal. And the third was to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv into Jerusalem. And so it's going to be very important for Secretary General Guterres to try to patch things up with the United States president and make sure that President Trump understands that there are more points of commonality and mutual interest than there are points of tension. With the NATO general, it is very important that he also communicate to the president the importance of United States aid, because the president has also cut drastically the amount of money that the United States contributes to NATO in order to place more pressure on the Europeans to increase their contributions, which they have done so far. I think between the two organizations, the president is likely to favor NATO over the United Nations, because it is a security apparatus, a key security alliance in Europe that affects the rest of the world.
Speaking of the rest of the world, of course, Gaza is back in the news. Incredible violence there with the move of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Guterres and Trump have a lot to talk about, from North Korea to the climate accord to the budget.
Right.
Is there room for Gaza?
I think that there's probably room for the United Nations Secretary General to raise it to the president, but I think it was made very clear earlier in the week when U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, got up out of her seat and walked out of the room when the Palestinian delegation ambassador was speaking, that there's no room for the Trump administration to have any movement on this issue. They knew going into the decision that the international community widely condemned it. We already know today that the United Nations Human Rights Council has called for a third-party investigation into the casualties that occurred in Gaza. However, it's most likely that the United States will block that, as they did earlier in the week when the country of Kuwait, the Kuwaiti delegation, called for the same thing.
And let's talk a little bit about the dynamics in the administration and how that may shape things. We've got John Bolton, who's the new National Security Advisor for President Trump. We've got a new Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, in office as well. How does that change the game for Guterres and what he's up against?
So that's a very significant shift, because both Rex Tillerson and former National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster were perceived as more open to diplomacy. We know that John Bolton and Mike Pompeo are much more hawkish. Mr. Bolton himself is a former ambassador to the United Nations, and during his time serving there, he has expressed immense frustration with the glut of the budget and
Certainly.
bureaucratic overlap and so on and so forth. And so he's going to be really strong pushing the United Nations to reform some of these bureaucracies.
Certainly a lot for the two to talk about. Bassima Alghussein, as always, thank you very much. The two leaders sitting down speaking right now. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of this meeting and what they share with the world once they're done.